Robbie Rocket said the infected were unpredictable, that they didn't seem to feel pain, that they seemed to lose complex motor skills, and while many spoke, they didn't make any sense, often just repeating a word or phrase, as Shouter was doing between bites of putrefying corpse. The infected were very hungry and ate nearly constantly. People, animals, food they could get open, each other. It was Robbie Rocket's fervently spoken hope that the infected would die out, die of whatever left them in this state, or die at each other's hands. Yesterday morning, the 6th day in the attic, Robbie said he'd received communication that estimated as many as 90% of Americans were either infected or dead already. That there wasn't much information from outside the U.S. coming into him. He had a satellite phone and a generator, and access to vending machines. He'd locked himself into the radio station, and he'd stayed there as long as he could, doing what he could to get information out. But at this point, he was not going to open the doors for anyone, short of a 4-star general, and then only one who could speak in complete sentences and answer questions about when Harry met Sally. Robbie Rocket reported the sickness had started with a sort of genetic treatment meant to affect metabolism and help people lose weight and maintain a healthy weight. Once human testing had been allowed, the treatment, used in a specific patient, had mutated and changed, becoming something like a virus. From there it spread like a flu. The red flu that had rushed around the world a year earlier. People got sick. Some few died. Most got better and went back to regular life. Then years later, somehow, the red flu had awakened again in a rush, and almost everyone who had been ill changed. Became one of the infected, one of the flu rioters, awake but not really aware, physically changed by a strange metabolism and nerve and brain damage, aggressive, starving, plagued at first by hallucinations and delusions. It didn't take long before the infected were no longer raving, were no longer speaking anything effectively, but by then the world had already ended. At least, all the world that Eve could see from her window. She watched as Shouter gorged himself, watched as he wandered off, listened to his voice get farther and farther away, then checked the lock on the door and that her stun gun was close at hand, and dozed off in the broken chair at the window. So we need supplies, and we need a more secure place to hole up, Eve said the next morning to the kids. We don't have weapons, and we're not really trained in anything. I meant to take karate, Will said. I wanted to be a Girl Scout, Katrin piped up. Aye, Viking, Val said firmly. Right, but still no weapons or training, and we need to figure out where we're going. Fort Snelling, Katrin said instantly. Wait, Fort Snelling? That's a long way from here. It's brilliant, but it's a long way from here, and I'm not sure how to get there from here, and there's no GPS with no cell phone, no Google Maps, Eve gestured to the dead phone. The Super America up the road has maps of the cities, Will said, and supplies. Yeah, but if there's food there, there might be infected there. We'll have to be careful, and it's still a long way to Fort Snelling. We'll get a car. You're not supposed to drive, but who's going to stop you now, Will said. Todd will go to Fort Snelling, Katrin said. Remember? We meant to visit the fort and watch them fire the cannon off, and Todd said that's where he'd be going when the zombies attack. Todd's 500 miles away, Kat. He may not be able to get here. He's coming. Todd coming, Val piped in. Okay, fine. We'll leave some kind of note. Robbie Rocket ever say if these people can read anymore? The zombies, Katrin corrected. Sweetie, they're not really zombies. Close enough, Will said, suddenly sounding exhausted. May as well be. Eve sighed. Okay, so far it's as good a plan as any. So we just need to find transport. We'll all go out to the gas station. We'll get a map and some food, and we'll find a car. There's the auto repair shop up past Super America, Will said. They'll have cars and keys. Want truck, Val said. That might be perfect if we can find one, Eve said. Then, the other thing is, we will have to let Cassie and Leah go. It won't be safe to try and haul them with us while we're running around and trying to get maps in a vehicle. They might be safest if we just let them go, so they're not trapped in this house if it burns later. No way, Katrin snapped, her eyes huge and betrayed. No cat left behind. Sweetie, I don't think we can carry them, supplies, and push Val in his chair. And what if they make noise, run from us? They'll be safer if we just make sure they can get in and out of the house, and we leave them here. Little Bunny, Will said, using her babyhood nickname. We'll come back when it's safe, and we'll make it so just one of the basement windows is open, so no one can get in. but they can get out to get food and get out if there's a fire. She glared at him, her lip trembling, but didn't answer. I promise. We'll come back if we can, as soon as we can. I'm trying to keep them and us safe, Bunny. Ozzy watched them, Val said. Katrin held in a sob and climbed onto Val's lap. Something she hadn't done since she was much smaller, and Val cuddled his baby sister. Katrin, at 11, was as tall as most women, with feet bigger than her mother's, but she was still Val's cousined baby sister. They prepared carefully. The infected seemed to avoid the bright light of day. Will wondered if it hurt them. Their eyes bulged and were red and bloodshot, occasionally even bleeding, according to Robbie Rocket. Will had seen the infected the first few nights in the attic, fighting in the street, chasing the uninfected and other infected alike, shouting and tearing and eating. The last couple nights, only Shouter had been in evidence. There was plenty for him to eat around here. This is going to be gross and smell bad, he said, thinking out loud. Yeah, Eve said. Oh yeah. Will went down to the main apartment while Eve got everything ready to move out. He painted to the largest wall in the living room, in 3-foot-high letters, Fart Smelling, with the bright orange paint left over from painting Katrin's room. He didn't know if the zombies, as Katrin insisted on calling the infected, could read any longer, but if one of them saw this, it wouldn't be a clue to where they were heading. But if Todd came to the apartment and let himself in with the key Will knew he still had, he'd see it, and he'd know where they were. If the uncles came, they'd know. Maybe there wasn't a lot of hope, but still some hope, and Will clung to the hope his family would be together again somehow. The uncles, Eve's brother, and his husband, and Todd, Eve's partner, and the children's stepfather for half a decade before the breakup were his family. The father they'd fled years before was not, and Will hoped the zombies had eaten him already, though he wouldn't mention that to Eve, because it would upset her. No matter what their father had done to them, Eve didn't want them to hate him, as if simply forgetting him was a viable course of action. Will knew it hadn't worked for her. Todd wasn't the only one who'd been awakened by the screaming nightmares. At noon, they headed down the stairs, supplies packed into backpacks and the wheelchair bag. Val carried a bag on his lap of mostly lightweight things. A clean change of clothes for each of them, socks, the thin metallic emergency blankets, his own flashlight. Katrin had her small backpack, bulging with her things, a little opening left in the zippered top so Bertram could breathe. No one wanted stuffed Bertram to suffocate after all. They'd considered bringing the huge duffel bags with them, but they decided being able to move quickly was more important at the moment. The street was quiet of any sign of human life. The buzzing of flies was much louder than it had seemed inside the attic, and frightened dogs slunk away at the presence of Eve and the brood. Will carried the wheelchair down to the alley. Katrin and Eve helped Val down the stairs and out to the alley to be settled in his chair. Do we buckle him in? Will asked hesitantly. I hadn't thought of that, Eve said. Would they have to get him out of the chair in a hurry? Or should he be buckled in case they had to run with the chair, and risk the chair falling over? She dithered, unable to decide which was the worst scenario. Val gave an aggravated sigh, and buckled himself in, and settled the bag he was carrying on his lap. He gave them all a glare, daring them to mess with his arrangements. Well, we buckle him in, Eve said, and off they went, walking quickly and as quietly as possible, a block up to University, then left toward the gas station. Chapter 3. Not exactly what I expected. Shit, Will said, as they sheltered in a doorway, out of sight as much as possible, surveying University Avenue. Eve gave him a look. Shit, Val agreed, distinctly pronouncing the word, though much of his speech was difficult to understand. She sighed. Yeah, looks like a car won't do us any good. University was full of empty cars, some crashed together, doors open, batteries long dead. It would be impassable by car. We should get moving, she said. We still need that map. Bikes? Will asked. The Sibley Bike Depot, Katrin whispered. They have bikes and trailers. Yes, the depot first, and then the map, Eve said, turning the wheelchair back to the east. The Sibley Bike Depot was about a block to the east from the apartment. They hurried back the other way. Eve bent low over the wheelchair, as if by hovering over Val, she could keep him safer. Will ran on ahead a bit, Todd's old and bent aluminum baseball bat in his hands. Eve had the stun gun in her pocket. Katrin had a sturdy walking stick Will had made for her from a downed branch a couple years ago. And Val had his plastic lightsaber in hand. He was ready and determined to help protect them. Eve also had her best cooking knife in her jacket pocket, opposite the stun gun, just in case. But she hoped most fervently they wouldn't even see any infected. The bike depot was locked up, but the main window was smashed. So Will went in and unlocked it from the inside so they could get Val inside safely. They went into the workroom and storage area and barricaded the door with a desk. They found an older, heavy tandem bike for Katrin and Eve. Katrin had sensory integration dysfunction, which affected her own perception of her body in three-dimensional space, and made balancing on two wheels difficult for her. But it would be easier with Eve's help. Will found a workable bike for himself, and they found two trailers, one meant to carry a couple toddlers, and an old two-wheeled trailer without sides. While Will made sure the bikes were ready to go, Eve and Katrin pulled back and secured the zip-off top off the passenger trailer so Val would fit in it without having to curl up in a ball. Katrin pulled a cushion off the ratty old couch that had been near the desk and put it into the passenger trailer, while Eve helped Val transfer over. She tucked the wheelchair bag and the bag Val had been carrying in with him, then folded up the wheelchair and strapped it to the cargo trailer with bungee cords that had been hanging on the wall towards the back of the workroom. Katrin and Eve made a holder for Katrin's walking stick, a gnarled, heavy chunk of wood, by making a sort of sheath for it that could be carried over Katrin's back, out of ropes in the workroom. Eve looked at her tall 11-year-old daughter, who still had a child's face and hands, with a weapon strapped across her back, and she didn't cry, though she thought she would. Will connected the bike trailers properly. Eve started strapping the backpacks on top of the wheelchair. For one thing, so Katrin would have less unbalancing her. When she reached for Katrin's backpack, the girl yanked it away from her, her eyes suddenly huge and shocked. As she did so, the bag meowed. Casey, the elder calico, tiny in size and huge in attitude, shoved her face up to the hole left in the zippered top of the backpack, her scarred eye lending her a somewhat crazed appearance that for a crazy moment reminded Eve of Jack Nicholson axing open a door in The Shining. "Oh, by all the..." Eve muttered. "Stars and stones, Mom," Katrin said helpfully. "Hell bells," Val added happily, both of them using oaths from the Harry Dresden books she'd been reading them. "Hell's bells," Eve agreed. "Fine." She used lengths of cord to fashion harnesses for the cats, who were happy to be out of the backpack. In place of the cats in the backpack, Will stuffed bike repair supplies. Eve and Katrin tied the cats' harnesses safely into the passenger trailer with Val. Val offered them water and handfuls of the dry cat food. "Mom, look," Will said as they pushed the bikes and trailers through into the main shop room. He pointed to the cashier's counter. "Bike trail maps." He grabbed a handful and tucked them into the different backpacks, while Eve spread one out on the counter. "This is a good idea, Will," she said. "The bike trails are much less likely to be blocked by vehicles." "Or zombies," Katrin added. "Or the red flu victims," Eve corrected. "Which became zombies," Katrin said. "We can take trails all the way to the fort," Will said. "It's more complicated than taking the roads might be, but we can take the trails all the way to the fort itself." So, an hour later than she'd hoped, they were on the move again. Will pulling Val and the cats, who weighed together more than Val's wheelchair and the backpacks did. Carefully, they inched the bikes out of the bike depot, peered up and down University to be sure nothing was moving, then slipped out onto the sidewalk, mounted their bikes, and were off, brightly colored helmets on their heads. It was a slow go at first, with Katrin whimpering in worry beneath her breath, trying to figure out how to balance on the back of the tandem bike. She'd had her own bike when she was smaller, but when she outgrew training wheels, she'd given up bike riding because she didn't believe she could balance properly. Eve hoped in this moment she would discover differently. Will didn't realize he was holding his breath watching his sister try to balance herself, until he caught himself sucking a breath in when she wobbled to the side. "We're okay," Eve told her daughter. "You got this." "I don't." "You do," Eve said firmly. Katrin met her eyes in silence for a moment, then nodded, her jaw squared. "I do." The map had them heading to the west on University, then turning south across the freeway and get to the actual trails that would take them to Fort Snelling. As they turned south, though it was still bright daylight, they heard Shouter a few blocks to the east. "Must go faster," Val whispered. He extended his lightsaber. "Must go faster," Will agreed, and took off up the sidewalk, which was mostly unblocked, around his mother and sister. Eve and Katrin pedaled furiously to keep up, Katrin completely forgetting her fear of losing her balance in her fear of Shouter seeing them,